And so the confidence, I believe, always comes later. And I think that that's a really important distinction because confidence is often the result of taking action and not the reason that we actually take action. I'm Sylvia Garibaldi, founder and CEO of a well-established marketing training and done-for-you services company, tailored specifically for the modern legal and financial professional worldwide. While it's taken some trial and error to figure out which methods get the best results for professionals who are looking to grow their practices, fast forward to today, my team and I have nailed down and perfected a process that has helped so many of our clients consistently achieve outstanding results and create a legacy for their practices. I created the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast to give you simple, actionable, non-salesy, and results-driven marketing to grow your legal or financial practice like so many of our clients have. If you're a lawyer, mediator, financial, or divorce professional who is looking to become highly visible and wants to create a practice that makes an impact, then you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 126 of the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast. I'm your host, Sylvia Garibaldi. Today, I want to talk about what I believe is probably one of the most expensive mistakes professionals make. And the surprising part is that most people don't even realize that they're making it. And I'm not referring to bad marketing, or maybe you have a website that isn't working properly, and it's not about posting the wrong content. And so I think the biggest mistake is really just waiting. Waiting until you feel more confident or until you have more information. Or maybe it's because you want the timing to feel right, just waiting until you feel ready. And so over the years, I have worked with many lawyers, mediators, and divorce professionals and business owners from all over the world. And one thing that I've noticed is that people who struggle the most are rarely the least talented. In fact, many of them are incredibly smart. They're experienced, they're highly qualified, and they're really good at what they do. And yet they still feel stuck. Not because they lack the ability to move forward, but because they're waiting for certainty before taking that next step. And so maybe you've experienced this yourself. Perhaps you thought about running a webinar, but waited until you had the perfect topic. Or maybe you've considered starting a podcast and you just keep telling yourself you'll do it when things slow down. Maybe you need to reach out to that referral partner or speak at an event or become more visible online, but you've been waiting until you feel more prepared. And so what I see is while we wait, something interesting happens, right? Someone else moves first. Someone with less experience, someone with fewer credentials, someone who isn't necessarily more talented. They just simply decided to act before they felt completely ready. Can you relate to that, right? And I've seen this happen over and over again. And so the people who build thriving practices, strong referral networks, and meaningful visibility aren't always the smartest people in the room. Let's face it. More often than not, sometimes they're the people who are willing to take that first step while uncertainty still exists. And if I'm being really honest, some of the biggest opportunities in my business came from doing exactly that. That first workshop, the first podcast episode, the first webinar, the first speaking engagement. Oh my goodness, I can remember that too. The first piece of content. None of those things, let me reassure you, happened because I felt completely confident, okay? That confidence came later. In fact, that's a really important observation. It came from doing the work, from learning the experience and realizing that I was more capable than I thought. So that's what I want to talk about in today's episode, because if there's one message I hope you take away from this episode today, it's this. Confidence doesn't usually come before action. It comes from action. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about why so many smart, capable professionals get stuck waiting, what that waiting is actually costing them, and how to start moving forward even when you don't feel ready yet. So let's dive in. So I want to start with something important. Most people don't feel stuck because they're lazy, and they don't feel stuck because they don't care. In fact, it's the opposite. I work with professionals. I meet professionals daily, And I know that they care deeply about doing good work. They care about serving their clients well, and they care about getting things right. I think the problem is that somewhere along the way, many of us started believing that we need more certainty before we take action. And so, you could be telling yourself something like, I just need a little more information, or I need to think about it a bit longer. Maybe you think you need more certifications. That's another big one. Or maybe you think you need a better plan. And so on the surface, those things sound reasonable. In fact, they sound pretty responsible. After all, many professionals are trained to look for risks. And you're taught to analyze, you're taught to prepare, you're taught to avoid mistakes. And those are very valuable skills. But sometimes those same skills can work against us. I hope that's making sense because life doesn't always give us enough information to feel completely certain. So I want you to think about that. Can you know with certainty that people will register for your webinar? No, right? Can you know with certainty that a referral partner is going to say yes to meeting with you? Can you with certainty know that your next LinkedIn post is going to generate business? Well, of course not, right? So think about this. So many professionals spend months or even years waiting for certainty that never arrives. Is this something that you can relate to? Get honest with yourself and say, hey, is this me? And so while we're waiting and we tell ourselves, we've got to be careful about this, or maybe this is not the right time to do this, what's happening is we're really postponing action. So let me share an example. I remember speaking with a professional who had been talking about running a webinar for almost 2 years. 2 years, that's a long time, right? And every time we spoke, there was another reason to wait. So the slides weren't ready, the topic wasn't quite right, the timing wasn't perfect, they needed to do more research. And then one day I asked a very simple question. I said, what if you're already ready enough? And then there was silence because sometimes that's the real issue. Not that we need more information, not that we need a better plan. We don't need more certification. Sometimes we simply need to take the first step. And the truth is, most of the opportunities that have changed my business didn't come from having all the answers. They came from being willing to start before I had the answers. And yes, that takes courage. Absolutely. And that's a lesson I keep learning over and over again because certainty feels safe, but growth usually happens before certainty arrives. And if you're waiting until you feel completely ready, you may end up waiting a very long time. Now, here's the part that I think most people miss. When we decide not to make a decision, we often tell ourselves that we're staying safe, right? We tell ourselves that waiting doesn't really cost us anything. I mean, after all, we're not taking a risk. We're not making a mistake. And we're not putting ourselves out there. We're simply waiting until we feel more certain. But here's what I've learned. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a decision, and every decision has a cost. And I think that's really important to think about right now. The challenge is that the cost of waiting is usually invisible. It doesn't flash upon our screen, oh, this is what the cost is for not doing a webinar today, or this is the cost for not reaching out to the referral partner. No, we can't see that cost. It doesn't pop up on our screen. You don't get a bill in the mail. Nobody sends you an invoice. You don't wake up in the morning and suddenly realize exactly what waiting cost you. So instead, the cost shows up quietly. It shows up in the opportunities that you never pursued. And it for sure shows up in the conversations that you never started and the referral partners that you never met, or maybe like the post that you never wrote. And so the speaking opportunity that you never really applied for because you didn't think you were ready. And because none of those things actually happened, it's easy to convince yourself that nothing was lost. But the reality is something was lost. In fact, a number of studies on decision making suggest that people who are uncomfortable with uncertainty often delay decisions and take extra steps to avoid risk. And ironically, those delays can reinforce indecision and make future decisions even harder. So I want you to imagine something for a moment. What if you started creating content 1 year ago? what if you had started building referral relationships 2 years ago? I want to share something with you that I see come up time and time again. Many professionals I speak to know exactly who they want to attract, but where things break down isn't clarity, it's actually implementation. So they're not sure how to translate that into messaging, how to stay visible, or how to turn that visibility into actual client inquiries. So if this sounds familiar, I created a step by step guide to help you work right through this. This free guide walks you through how to define your ideal clients, identify the right referral partners, understand where they're actually looking, including AI, and most importantly, how to turn all of that into consistent action. You can download your free guide at www.sgandassociates.ca/free-guide. Link is also in the show notes. Or what if you had started speaking at events 3 years ago? What would your practice look like today? How many more people would know who you are? So think about that. The truth is that most professional success comes from those small actions that are repeated consistently over time. And that's why waiting is so expensive. Because every month that you delay is a month that you're not building momentum. And every year that you delay is a year that you're not building visibility. And so every opportunity that you postpone is an opportunity that can't compound. And I often hear professionals say things like, oh, I'll do this next year. I'll focus on that once things calm down. But here's the reality. Things rarely calm down. There's always another file. There's always another client. There's always another project. And there's always another reason to wait. And so before you know it, 5 years have passed. And I don't say this to discourage you. I'm saying this because I've seen it happen, and I see it happen frequently. And I've seen incredibly talented professionals spend years waiting for the perfect time. And I've also seen professionals who weren't necessarily more talented or more qualified. I've seen them build remarkable practices simply because they took action. They started, they moved before they had confidence. And of course, it wasn't done perfectly, and it wasn't done with certainty. None of us have that certainty. They may simply depend on being willing to take one imperfect step forward because momentum is built through action. And the longer we wait, the harder it becomes to create. Now, here's where I think many professionals get messed up. They've convinced themselves that confidence is something that they need to have before they take action, right? And maybe you've said some version of this to yourself before, like, I'll do that, but I'm not quite confident yet. Or I'll start posting more consistently, but I don't really know what to say. I'd like to speak at conferences, but there are people who know so much more than I do. And so what's happening here is that the assumption behind all of those statements is exactly the same. That confidence comes first. That one day that you'll wake up and you'll feel ready. And that somehow you'll reach a point where all that uncertainty disappears and you'll suddenly feel confident enough to move forward. But I don't think that's how confidence works. In fact, when I look back at my own life in business, I can't think of many examples where I completely was confident before starting something new. And I certainly wasn't confident before I started my first podcast. And I wasn't confident before I started speaking to larger audiences or running workshops. And I definitely wasn't confident before I started putting out ideas and opinions out into the world where other people could see them and could judge me. And so I do remember feeling a lot of uncertainty, and I still experience some uncertainty today, but it still doesn't stop me from moving forward. If we're being very honest here, I think that's true for most of us. When you think back to your own career, were you confident the first time that you met with a client? Were you confident the first time that you walked into a mediation? Probably not, right? You were learning, you were figuring things out. You were doing the best with the knowledge and experience that you had at that moment. And so the confidence, I believe, always comes later. And I think that that's a really important distinction because confidence is often the result of taking action and not the reason that we actually take action. So the reason I can sit behind this microphone today and record a podcast isn't because I was born confident. It's because I've done it over and over again. It's repetition. So, the reason a skilled professional, a skilled mediator, a skilled lawyer can walk into a very difficult conversation and remain calm isn't because they never felt nervous. It's because they've had hundreds of conversations and learned that they can handle them. For example, the reason an experienced lawyer can stand out in front of a judge and appear confident isn't because they never doubted themselves, right? It's because they've spent years building evidence that they can do the job. And that's what confidence really is. It's evidence. It's the result of proving something to yourself repeatedly. It's taking those actions over and over again. And so every time that you take a step forward, you collect a little more evidence. And every time you try something new, you collect a little more evidence. And so every time you survive something that once felt uncomfortable, you're actually just collecting more evidence. And I think that's where many professionals can feel stuck. They're waiting for confidence before they act. So if confidence isn't what separates successful professionals from everyone else, then what does? Right. And so over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet and interview some incredibly successful people. And I feel very privileged and honored to have been able to do this. And so I've worked with lawyers who have built very thriving practices and mediators who have become highly sought out after in their field, divorce professionals who have created remarkable businesses, speakers, authors, consultants, and professionals who seem to have achieved what many others aspire to, especially when I first started my business and I was working with those types of professionals and consultants. And if I'm honest, when I first started meeting some of these people, I assumed that they must know something that the rest of us didn't. And I assumed that they were more confident, that they were more certain, that they were more fearless. In some respects, I think that they were just more naturally gifted. But I have to tell you something. The more conversations I had, the more I realized something surprising. Most of them still have doubts and worries and concerns and questions about, am I making the right decision? And as a marketing coach, they would ask me questions that sometimes surprised me because I thought, my goodness, this comes down to a confidence thing. So I realized that how many of us are very much the same, right? And what they've learned is that uncertainty is simply part of the process. So think about it for a moment. Every successful professional has launched something that didn't go exactly as planned. Every successful professional has made decisions without having all of that information. They had the ideas and they weren't sure if those ideas were going to work. And so every successful professional has felt nervous at any given point in time before that important meeting, before that presentation, before that opportunity. They're not succeeding because they have more certainty. They're succeeding because they've become comfortable moving forward without it. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that we can learn because many people spend years trying to eliminate uncertainty. They want guarantees. They want proof. They want to know exactly how things will turn out before they're willing to take the next step. But that's not how growth works. Growth is very messy. And yes, it requires some experimentation. Will things go perfectly? Absolutely not. And the professionals who continue to grow, they understand that. They don't ask themselves, how can I be certain that this is going to work? Instead, they ask questions like, what can I learn from this? What's the next right best step for me to take? What's the opportunity if this goes well? And if it doesn't go well, what should I do next? So it's not like they're not planning or just saying, oh, let's just try it and see how it goes. They're being cautious as well, but they want to make sure that they're taking the right steps and that they are taking the right amount of risk moving forward. Because whenever we're facing a decision, we tend to focus almost entirely on the risks of taking action, right? The negatives of it. What if this flops? What if nobody attends? What if that referral partner doesn't send me any referrals? What if I embarrass myself? But instead, I think we need to start asking a more important question. What if this does work? What if that workshop introduces you to people who become clients? What if that referral partner becomes one of your strongest sources of business? And I can honestly say that this has happened to me before too, where some of my strongest sources of business actually surprised me. And, I was reluctant to even engage with some of these referral partners because I was hesitant. But thank goodness I took the step forward. and did do that, right? So think about those opportunities that maybe you're turning away. I think the reality is there are risks on both sides of every decision, as I've just said. There are risks to taking action. Of course, there are. But there are also risks to standing still. And I think the professionals who continue to grow have learned exactly how to weigh both because they understand. They understand that waiting may feel safer in the short term, but it often carries a much bigger cost in the long term. And that's why they don't strive for perfect decisions. They strive for forward movement. They focus on progress instead of perfection. And they understand that most decisions are not permanent. And most decisions are simply the next step in gathering information and the next step in learning or the next step in growth. And I think that that's incredibly freeing if you think of it that way, because it means that you don't have to know everything before you begin. I mean, can you imagine the pressure on us to have to think and know everything before we take the next best step, right? It can be paralyzing because you don't have the perfect plan. You don't feel completely confident, and you simply have to be willing to take that next step. And, honestly, when I look at the professionals who have built the strongest practices, as I've said, and the strongest reputations, the strongest referral networks, they are professionals who don't have all the answers. I've seen it because I've worked with many of them. I see people who were willing to just move before they had all the answers, right? And I see people who understand that clarity often comes from action and not before it. And I would say perhaps the biggest difference of all is they stopped asking, am I ready? And they just started asking, what's the next best step I need to take? So I want to leave you with this question. What decision have you been putting off? And I mean, not the one that you've been talking about, not the one that you've been researching, and not the one that you've been thinking about. I mean, the one that you've been avoiding. Is it starting a webinar? Is it speaking at a large organization or association where all your peers are at? Maybe it's becoming more visible online. Or maybe it's making a big change in your practice that you know needs to happen. So whatever it is, chances are you've already spent a lot of time thinking about it. And you've weighed the pros and cons. You know you have, right? I know you have too. And you've considered the risks. You've imagined what could go wrong. And if you're like most professionals, you've probably told yourself that you'll take action when you feel more ready. But here's the thing. After everything that we've talked about today, I hope you can see that readiness may not be what you're waiting for. You may be waiting for that feeling that just never fully arrives, because the truth is, most meaningful opportunities in life and in business come wrapped in a lot of uncertainty. One of the things I've noticed about highly successful professionals is that they don't spend their lives trying to eliminate uncertainty. Instead, they learn how to move forward while uncertainty is still present. And they stop asking themselves, how can I be absolutely sure? What's the next best step? Because that's really all any of us can do. And we don't need to know what the next 5 years will look like. We don't need to know exactly how every decision will turn out. And we don't need a perfect plan, but we simply need to identify the next best step and take it. I often think about where my business would be today if I waited until I felt ready. And what if I never launched the podcast because I wasn't sure anybody would listen, or didn't host that first workshop or webinar, or reached out to that company? And what if I waited until I felt completely confident? And so the reality is that many of these opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to experience started with a lot of uncertainty. And they started with a decision to move forward, despite not knowing exactly what would happen. And I suspect the same is true for you as well, that there are many opportunities waiting for you. There may be a referral relationship waiting to be built for you right now. There may be a speaking opportunity waiting for you to apply for. And there may be a future client who needs to hear your message. But none of those things can happen while you're standing still. So here's my challenge to you, my friend. Before the end of this week, identify one decision you've been delaying, just one. And then ask yourself a different question. Instead of saying, am I ready? I want you to ask yourself, what is the smallest step that I can take right now? Maybe it's sending an email. Maybe it's making that phone call. Whatever it is, please take action and make it small enough that you can do it within the next 48 hours, not next month and not next quarter and not when things slow down, within the next 48 hours, because momentum doesn't come from those giant leaps. It really comes from those small actions repeated over time. And often one small action is really all it takes to change the direction of where you're headed. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes packed with actionable strategies to grow your practice. See you in the next episode.